Well, welcome to the official second half of my top 100 board games list. We are now into the top 50, and I'm just going to get more effusive in my praise of these games as we go. The theme for this set of 10 is family weight games, games that you could, reasonably play with a family of people who don't necessarily play a lot of board games, don't necessarily have high board game literacy. Maybe not completely new, but perhaps people who have only tried a game like Ticket to Ride or Carcassonne before, you could get them to try a lot of these games. So let's get started. My number 50 is the Quacks of Quedlingberg, which is down 29 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 4, and will play 2 to 4 players. Quacks of Quedlingberg is a game that I own, but I don't have a copy of here. I'm currently lending it out to someone else. And I really enjoy this game, although I can't even name why it's dropped so far down my list. 29 spots, that is significant. It's a push your luck game, and it's a bag building game, so you put stuff into your bag, you either buy or you get points every round, or do both if you don't manage to have your pot explode from these yellow death bombs. Sorry, not yellow, they're white. White death bombs that will cause your potion to explode, and then you have to choose to either go shopping or to get points that round. Points help you win. Shopping helps you get a better bag, so you could potentially get more points down the road. So it's kind of a difficult choice, or maybe you should just play it safe and stop a little bit sooner. So these are the kinds of choices that you have to make, and it does sort of have the satisfying sort of combo-driven gameplay of like certain ingredients work well with each other, as each color will be assigned a different special power depending on what version of the game, not version of the game, but a version of that particular potion. So blacks are usually the same, but yellows will be different in each game depending on which yellow formula you want to use. Same thing for the greens and so on. It's quite delightful. It's really quick. It's a game that I think you can introduce to people who haven't played a ton of games. It's maybe a little bit more complicated than a typical introductory game, but not by a lot. I think if you are dealing with people who are clearly with playing games and are grasping some of the other more conventional games without too much difficulty, you could easily push them onto this one. I think what it needs from me now is just some expansion material, and I know there's one expansion out, and I think a second one on its way soon that I haven't had a chance to get, which I probably want to get for this game because I just want more variety in terms of like the different kinds of powers that you can get depending on which things you throw into your bag, into your pot. So that is my number 50, the Quacks of Quedlingberg. My number 49 is Stone Age, which is up 9 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 4 and will play 2 to 4 players. Now, Stone Age, this box doesn't actually contain all the components. I'm using it for something else right now because I am actually missing some of the components. I can kind of borrow things that work well enough from other games to still play it when I want to, but it's kind of annoying that I have to go through that process. I just was using them for a game that I was designing on my own, and then I just unfortunately lost those components along with components to several other games. Wasn't great, but I've just sort of wanted to get a fully functioning copy since then, and I still haven't quite done it because I haven't wanted to spring for an entirely new copy either. Stone Age is a worker placement game and has sort of been the classic worker placement game that a lot of people have used to introduce people who are new to hobby board gaming to that mechanism. It's a really good interpretation of that. It gives you difficult places to go, but it also gives you the choice of some places let you choose how many workers you spend on that particular spot, and you get more of a benefit the more workers you spend on that spot. Whereas other worker placement spots are locked in. You use exactly 1 here, you use exactly 2 here, and so on. The theme isn't especially present, other than the fact that you're gathering very basic things like wood and stone and clay and even gold. Um, but it does have one of my favorite things in all of gaming, which is the Love Shack, where you send exactly 2 workers to the Love Shack, and out from it you get a new baby that you can use in the next round. But you have to feed that baby right away, which makes sense thematically. I think that even if you're putting them to work right away, you still have to feed them before they get to that point. It's not terribly complex, but it is quite long for what it is, which is probably what keeps it lower on my list than it might otherwise be, because I like a lot of things about it. There's some dice rolling where you get 1 die per worker you send in for different resources, and then you divide it by an increasingly higher number as you send them for increasingly more valuable resources. And then you can get screwed over by dice rolls, but there are certain ways to mitigate that. It's quite good. I just wish it didn't consistently take over 2 hours when it really should feel like it should take as long as it says on the box, which is 60 to 90 minutes. Which I'm not. I may have had that happen once, that a game was actually within that time frame. It's very good, and I would recommend it. I'm just not sure I would recommend it over as an introductory game over Century: A New World if you're looking for that easy, let's just get people get their feet wet with worker placement first, because I think the other one is an easier game to get your head around. There's fewer rules, and it's a quicker game for sure. But this one's still a lot of fun, and I play it in situations other than just introducing new gamers to board gaming or worker placement specifically. So I'm a fan, and I'm happy to play it pretty much anytime. I just wish I had a fully functional copy right now, and I don't. So that is my number 49, Stone Age. My number 48 is actually Champions of Midgard, another worker placement game. It is down 8 spots on the list, so not a significant move. Its weight is about a 5, and it plays 2 to 5 players. Although I think that is 2 to 5 players with the expansion. One of the expansions, which I do own. If you get just the base box, it is a 2 to 4 player game. Okay, so Champions of Midgard is ironically another game in that let's introduce people to worker placement games. But just by virtue of the fact that worker placement games entail you needing to know not only how the basic mechanisms of the game work, but also what like each individual spot that you can send your worker to, what each of those things do, they tend to be intrinsically heavier games than a lot of other games that are used as sort of an introduction to board gaming. What makes this one distinct, and its nearest competitor would probably be Lords of Waterdeep, which is a game that has not appeared on my list yet, is that this one includes sort of more Ameritrash style mechanisms where you are rolling dice, and depending on what is on those dice, you either succeed or fail at combat. Defeating combat monsters, that gets you points, and that's the main driver for winning the game. So you have to do it. You have to get the dice, you have to throw the dice, and then you lose some dice because the monsters attack you. And then there's just also logistics about how are you going to get them on boats? How are you going to feed them on the journey so they don't starve and then you suddenly can't use some of yours? How do you deal with the fact that you only have 8 slots for dice at any given point? How do you deal with the different kinds of dice that are available every round? And that puzzle is really interesting. It feels like a very stock standard, not bad, but just very standard worker placement game that also just has this combat mechanism kind of spliced in. It doesn't feel like it's disjointed in how it fuses those things, but it is maybe notable for the fact that it takes 2 fairly conventional strains. One which is the Eurogame-centric mechanism of worker placement and the sort of dice-chucking American-style sensibility and fuses them into the same game, which is not always done. I would say this is more on this on the spectrum of Ameritrash to Eurogame. This is more towards the Eurogame because it really is just that one combat element that is decidedly Ameritrash flavored. But it is still that fusing of those two flavors that makes this one distinct, and a very good game in my opinion. That also gets better with the expansions, because one of the expansions adds the ability to start getting essentially vouchers for your defeated warriors. It also starts to add additional warrior types, which do different things that are more interesting than the standard ones that come with the base version of the game. So I feel like if you are interested in the game, it might be worth investing in the full set of both of the major expansions, whose names I can't remember right off the top of my head. I think one is called Valhalla, and the other one is like Undermountain or something like that. This box is really heavy because it's, I think, got both expansions in my main box right now. I recommend it. Is it the mid-weight worker placement game to go to? I mean, the fact that it's back-to-back with Stone Age means there's at least some competition, and maybe if I have Lords of Waterdeep up there, that might also be another one to consider. But it's at least in the conversation. So if you want to get started with worker placement games and you've already kind of cleared some of the standard gateway games that you're typically sort of pushed towards early on, yeah, you can give it a try, especially if you want that dice rolling element in the game. So that is my number 48, Champions of Midgard. My number 47 is Deception Murder in Hong Kong, which is down 12 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 3, and will play somewhere between 5 and 12 players. I believe you can technically play it at 4, but don't. Because there's a key role in the game that you need to have, I believe, at least 5 players in order to enjoy. If I'm remembering this correctly. Anyways, Deception Murder in Hong Kong is a social deduction game, which is a category of game I tend to really enjoy, but I don't tend to pursue learning new ones in that genre as much as I do more strategic Euro games. There are a lot more strategic Euro games on my list than there are games like Deception Murder in Hong Kong. And I don't think it's because I tend to like Euro games more necessarily. I think I tend to like them about the same as social deduction games like Deception. But the difference is I just know more Euro games, and it's like I get excited about a $50 or $70 or $80 box of a Euro game that I think is going to be the next strategy game that I fall in love with. Whereas if I have a chance to play a social deduction game, I will, but I don't necessarily trip over myself to do it. Anyways, Deception is a game in which I think this is almost more accessible than a lot of other social deduction games because you've got 2 sets of 4 cards in front of you, every player except one. And one of them will be murder weapon type things, and another one will be sort of clues, which could be anything in the environment. It could be a game console, it could be a potted plant, it could be a flat screen television, it could be a blender, any one of those kinds of things, whereas the murder methods are more direct, like strangulation or stabbing or something like that. One person is going to get dealt a card. One person is going to be the clue giver, and that person will deal out cards to the rest of the players. One of those players will get a card that says murderer. Everyone will be told to shut their eyes, and then the person who's the clue giver says murderer, open your eyes, and point to one of your murder weapons and one of your items that person has to do so, then shuts their eyes. There's a couple of extra steps depending on if you add extra rolls, but you should probably start with the most basic version first. And at that point, what happens is the person who walked everyone through the situation and knows who the murderer is going to try to help everyone around the table, except the murderer, capture the murderer by getting them to guess what the murder weapon item is and the murder weapon and the sort of environmental clue, like the blender or whatever it happens to be. You each are given one guess at it, including the murderer, because you can't out that person as the one who isn't going to try to correctly guess. You can make an official guess and you say, is it this item and this weapon? And the person giving the clues has to say either yes or no. They can't say no, but you're close. They have to just say yes or no. And meanwhile, the person giving the clues has like these panels in front of them that have things like, where was the scene of the crime? And what was the personality of the murderer? And things like this. And they have to give bullets, like these little plastic bullets, on the list for the thing that indicates which of those clues best suits this situation. So they have to use their imagination to kind of make a connection for, like, how did this murderer go down if it was like the game console with strangulation? How did that end up working out? Like, where would that have taken place? What kind of personality did the strangler have? Things like that. And then it just becomes this intriguing game of who do you trust, who don't you trust, and what are the clues trying to lead you towards. Fantastic game. I think if it hadn't had been for a certain global pandemic, I would have played this a whole lot more than I have already. I've got an expansion, which I believe I got to try once, and it was good. But I also feel like I want to explore it a heck of a lot more, as well as just the game itself. This one might climb my list if I can just have a chance to play it, and I just haven't been able to, which is the real shame here. Deception Murder in Hong Kong is a great game that I would recommend to people that are interested in the idea of playing games that give you trust issues. Who at the table that you're playing with do you trust, and who do you think is lying to you? And there's some game here to go along with that makes this really interesting. It's not my absolute favorite social deduction game, but it is pretty terrific, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it to other people. Give it a play if you got 5 people. Deception Murder in Hong Kong. I don't know why I can't say murder. My number 47. My number 46 is No Thanks. No Thanks. It doesn't show it on the box, but there's supposed to be an exclamation point there. Is up 3 spots on my list, so rising slightly is quite good. Its weight is a 1, and it plays 3 to 5 players, although I believe there are rules in here that can play 6 or 7. I just would never do that. No Thanks, I used to call the simplest game I like. I'm not entirely sure that's actually true, because there are some very simple party games that I like as well. There may even be some coming up. I would have to look at my list. But it might be the simplest non-party game that I like. All you do is you look at a card, and a card is worth the number of points that is printed on it. A 30 is 30 points. A 23 is 23 points, and so on. You can either take the card and get points, which you are trying to avoid because you want the lowest score, not the highest. Or you can take one of your chips, and you only have a small pile of these at the start of the game, and put it on the card. Every one of those chips is worth -1 point, which means you want them. So you don't want to do either of those things. You don't want to take the card and get all those negative points, but you don't also want to give up a chip onto that card. What's going to happen is everyone's going to say no to that 30-point card, but as time goes on and people keep putting chips on it to pass on it, at some point you're going to go, you know, there's like 17 chips on that 30 card. That's really only a loss of about like 13 points. And I would have all those chips. I think I might take it. Or you might go, I could get 17 chips, but I don't think anyone's going to take it if I put just one more chip on it. If it goes around the table one more time, I'm going to get even more chips. So maybe I'll just hold off for just one more round. And then does that pay off, or does that come back to bite you because someone on the other side of the table has the exact same thought as you and goes, well, yeah, I'll take it with 19 chips on it. The only other thing you have to factor in is any runs. Only the lowest card in that run counts as points against you. So if you've got the 13, the 14, the 15, the 16, and the 17, only the 13 counts for negative points. Those other cards I mentioned do not count. But although there's one card between 3 and 35, like one card on each number in that sequence from 3 to 35, the problem is some of them have been randomly taken out of the deck. So if you've got the 28 and the 30, you don't even know if you're going to have a chance to take that 29 to like cut all those points out of your score. Fascinating push your luck game. It is as much about reading what the other players are going to do as it is about trying to pick the optimal time to lose some points for the sake of getting your cachet of cards built back up. And that's really hard in this game, considering like you can just get too afraid to take anything, completely run out of chips, and start having to take cards left and right, and that can ruin your game. But it's so fast that it doesn't even matter if you do that, because you can just play this like I haven't done this. I've just played several rounds and we've declared a winner for each round. But you could do this over the course of the overall winner is declared after someone gets to 300 points or something like that. And whoever has the lowest score at the conclusion of that round is the overall winner. You absolutely could play it like that. It's just a really great, extremely straightforward game. And one that I just miss. I miss having people to play it with, and having people a really dirt simple game that I could teach them, that I could have fun with them. Because I often find games that are this simple aren't often that interesting, and this is an exception. So that's my number 46. No thanks. Okay, my number 45 is Kaylas. It is up 2 spots. Its weight is about a 7, and I remember when I used to think that this was an example of a fairly complex game. And it plays 3 to 5 players. Technically has a 2-player mode, don't listen. Okay, so Kaylas is maybe one of the games that I've cooled on the most. I've only rated so many games a 10. I really feel like a game has to earn my affection over a period of time and prove that it's more than just a flash in the pan for me to ever rate it a 10. All the games that I've decided to rate a 10 based on this year's list are all games that I have played multiple times and it has impressed me every time. Kaylas is a game that I had rated a 10 and dropped to, I believe, an 8. And it was just based on one play, and I just realized over the course of the play I hadn't played it for a while. I played it with my parents, a 3-player game, which is typically considered the best player count to play this at, and I just wasn't as enamored with it as I used to be. I just didn't get the same thrill from it that I had previously. It's still a great game. It's a worker placement game where you're building these worker placement spots along a road, which is kind of cool. And you claim it, and it's yours. You built it, and you get a point every time everyone else uses it, which is great because they usually are more useful than the ones that start on the board at the beginning. But there's also this interesting mechanism with the provost, and it's provost and something else. Anyways, and I believe it's the provost that if it moves backwards and it moves behind one of the worker placement spots on this winding road down the towards the bottom of the board. The ones ahead of it on the road don't trigger at all, and players can conspire with each other to move it back. So if only one player had moved ahead on the road on like one of these new worker placement spots that someone else had built, they're not going to be able to use it because everyone else have paid money to move it back and essentially stop them from getting stuff that turn. That's really mean, and it can depend wildly depending on how mean-spirited your group is on the likelihood of that actually happening. If you don't know that it can happen, you can kind of play too close to the line and end up putting yourself in danger and make it really easy for someone to pay like 3 gold or whatever the currency is in this one to just move it back 3 places and stop a couple different people from being able to get the things done that they were planning to do that round. It's interesting. There are tracks in it that give you bonuses, and you can try to race up different tracks for different bonuses. I think it's a game that came out early enough in like 2005 that it didn't have to do as much to distinguish itself as it would if it had come out now. And I know there's a revamped version which I'm interested in trying. I don't know if I'll buy it, but I want to give it a shot. And that one is but I don't know how you fix the core problem of like what does this one do different that other worker placements games don't already do. And I'm not sure what the answer is for that, other than the mean aspect of like using the provost to screw other players over. That isn't in a lot of other Euro games. Most of them tend to play nice a lot more than that. It's still fun. I would still like to play this. And I would really like to be so impressed by the new version, which I believe is called 1303 or something like that, Kaylas 1303. That it could jump back into my top 10. I just don't think it's going to happen. So for now, it's going to land somewhere in the 40s. It's 45. I still really like it. I don't even know why I've moved it up slightly, because given the new games that are being added to my list, everything should be kind of the average game on my list that isn't changing much in my estimation should be slipping slightly. So going up slightly is actually going upstream. Maybe I just need to play it again, but this time not with my parents. Anyways, that is my number 45, Kaylas. My number 44, which is remarkably the exact same place that it was last time, is Galaxy Trucker. Galaxy Trucker is a weight about a 6 and plays 2 to 4 players. Galaxy Trucker is ridiculous. So there's a new edition out, and I have no particular desire to get that new edition, but I'm also like, I have no particular desire to get rid of my copy either, because Galaxy Trucker is a game in which it plays in 2 halves. The first half, you're trying to build a ship as fast as you possibly can for as many different kinds of things that can possibly happen to your ship. You could get attacked, so you need guns. You might need to carry some cargo, so you need some cargo space. You might need to protect your ship from asteroids, and so you need to generate some shields. You might need to jet around around space at a faster speed, so you need some thrusters. And it's all within this shape. Depending on what round you're in, it gets bigger as the rounds go on. And you have to like try to rearrange these pieces that you're drawing from the center of the table, and they're initially face down. You look at them, do you have a place to put it, or are you going to throw it away? And if you throw it away, you throw it face up, and that means other players can look and say, oh, he threw away batteries, I need batteries, I'm going to grab those batteries and put them on my ship. And then you can have people like say, I'm done my ship, I'm flipping a timer on you, and once it runs out in 30 seconds, you have to go with that broken down ship that you have. and then you run your ship through the gauntlet and it blows up. In fact, the rules say that you are a winner if you make $1. If you make $1, you've won. You've just won more if you manage to make more money than anyone else. But making zero money is quite possible because you can just have your ship repeatedly blow up or just get broken. And regardless of which way it goes, you're going to suffer major penalties for constructing your ship as badly as you did. It is a game that you're either going to love or hate. I really like it. I think the fact that it just constantly falls apart on you is actually really, really funny. And it's really, really funny to watch other people try to struggle to get something working out of the game's rule set. And it also gets harder as you go through the rounds, so there's more reward possible. I do feel like this is a game that would morph as you got better at it. Like, if you go back to it and you realize, oh, I know how to roughly construct these pieces now, so I just know which ones to look for and how to scavenge the other pieces that other players are throwing away, then I think the game will morph at that point where you're actually trying to get more cash, and you have 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 rounds are actually profitable for you. I think the game would transform at that point, but I'm not there yet. I just don't play it frequently enough to be at that point. But I also am kind of in this nice sweet spot where when I do play it, I feel like I'm actually semi-close to constructing a good ship, or a good enough ship at least, to get through most of the possible challenges. So it's a really cool game, and it is definitely the very definition of try before you buy, because I know some of you are going to loathe this game. I'm a fan. It's on my list for that reason. That's my number 44, Galaxy Trucker. My number 43 is the surprisingly heavy box, Near and Far, which is up 18 spots from my last list. Its weight is about a 5, and it plays 2 to 4 players. So this one's risen, and I think it's just because I love what the game is. It is one part standard Euro game. It's a worker placement game. Again, I could have done worker placement as my theme for this one. In fact, you know what? I'm going to call it now. I'm changing the theme of this list of 10 from family weight games, although a lot of these are family weight games, to worker placement. Because I just have too many worker placement games on this particular list. Anyways, back to Near and Far. It is a Euro worker placement game combined with a storytelling game with a big book of stories that will give you choose your own adventure style choices, and depending on what choices you get different resources that you can then feed into the Euro worker placement engine that the game has. Near and Far has lovely art. It is by a one-man band of a production team, namely Ryan Lockett does the art, the design, and the publishing of all of his games, as far as I know. And he is quite a multi-talented man, because this is a great production. The art looks fantastic, and it plays really smoothly. This is a game that is something that I've been able to play with Amanda, and has been quite satisfying at 2 players. But it has also just been rewarding as a game that I would have suspected might have been a little heavier in terms of its mechanisms and the complexity of figuring out how all the things interact with each other than she would normally enjoy. But I think the story elements and the art draws her in, and it works for me too. The more I talk about this, the more I think I just really need to get this played again with her, because while I'm waiting for certain pandemics to end, I think this is a game we can play together that we're both going to get a lot out of. And for that reason alone, it is a very valuable part of my collection, and I can't see myself getting rid of this anytime soon. Now, this is a sequel to a game I did get rid of called Above and Below, and I got rid of it specifically because I heard Near and Far was better, and it is. Above and Below wouldn't be anywhere near my top 100 list, not because it's bad, but because it's just limited. And this one is a much more comprehensive and polished game. There's also a sequel coming out to this one, and I'm wondering if it will be to Near and Far what Near and Far was to Above and Below. The new one's called Now or Never. But I don't really have any dissatisfaction with this game. I kind of just want to explore it more. Maybe if I play it to the point where all the stories start to become repetitive and I start to know, oh, I remember how this part turns out. The king turns to you and throws you in the dungeon or whatever it happens to be. Until it gets to that point, I'm not really looking for a replacement. I'm quite happy to play this one. So that is my number 43, Near and Far. My number 42 is Everdell, which is down 5 spots, so it's kind of treaded water, essentially. Its weight is about a 5, and it plays 1 to 4 players, and it actually plays fairly well solo. This is another game that is worker placement. This is another game that features very charming art, and this is another game that I think thrives on its theme. So it's actually seems quite appropriate that it falls right next to Near and Far on my list. Everdell is great. It's got sort of a Redwall flavor, if you've ever read that series of books. Anthropomorphic, woodland creatures, living out in a society, doing things like keeping shops and farming farms and things of that nature. It's got a lot of expansions. I haven't tried any of them yet. I might get some of them at some point, but I would need to gain some sense of where I should start with the expansions, and I don't know yet. It's a game that is maybe just barely into the next step category of games, where I wouldn't put this on someone who is brand new to games despite the charming theme, because, well, it's quite intuitive to play if you already have played other worker placement games, like I have, and is quite intuitive to play if you've played other tableau building games, like I have. If those things are both new to you, it's a lot to take in at once. So I think you have to resist the urge to try to use this as a gateway game. It is just too complex for that. It's not too complex by a lot, but that's part of why it's so tempting. It's like, is it really that complicated? And yes, for people who haven't played this kind of game at all, it is. If you're teaching this to gamers, they will pick it up really fast because they'll go, okay, standard worker placement, got it. Okay, standard tableau building, I'm limited to 15 cards in my tableau, got it. And you can almost play the game if you've played games like that before from just that description. It's almost exactly that straightforward in terms of how the execution goes. I almost think if you're an experienced gamer, you could learn this game by looking at the interface. Almost. But it just executes those things well, and it is a game that is solid in every respect, but not outstanding in any of them. And so that's why it's going to land somewhere in like the middle of my top 100, I think, consistently. Unless one of the expansions does something with it that really impresses me, I think this one is kind of just going to be a solid somewhere between 40 to 65 on my list entry for several years more yet. I recommend it. Just don't show this to your brand new to games aunt or cousin who hasn't played anything like that, and they look at the cover and go, oh, that looks wonderful. Steer them towards a Carcassonne or a Jamaica or even Wingspan, I think would work more than this, and I think Wingspan might be a little much for a lot of people. So that is my number 42, Everdell. Isn't it just, look how pretty it is. And last on this list is my number 41, and I mentioned it earlier actually. It is Lords of Waterdeep. Lords of Waterdeep is up one spot. It just had to move one. Its weight is about a 5, and it plays 2 to 6 players with the expansion, which I do have, and absolutely recommend. If you're going to get Lords of Waterdeep, get the expansion with it. And it plays 2 to 5 players if you don't have the expansion. Okay, so Lords of Waterdeep is maybe my current King of the Hill in terms of mid-weight worker placement game to spring on people who I want to give a taste of sort of what a more involved strategy game can be like, but I don't want to overwhelm them with complexity. If I'm trying to strike that balance and I want it to be a worker placement game, which I often do, Lords of Waterdeep would kind of be my go-to, despite the fact that it's a Dungeons and Dragons, what is it, I forget what the actual name of the setting is, but it's sort of their stock standard fantasy setting that this one is set in, and I I think that actually hurts the game for anyone who isn't like playing tabletop RPGs currently. It's a great bridge for people that are playing those kinds of games because you can just sort of say, "Hey, this is set in the same universe where you already play D&D. Um, why not just try this board game version?" And if they're playing games that are as complex as tabletop role-playing games can be, they're probably not going to be the people that you're worried are not going to be able to handle the complexity of the game that you're teaching them. I think you still want to start them a little bit simpler than some of the most complex games and anything that you would classify as a heavy Euro, just because you still want people to get acclimated to the mechanisms, but you can get them acclimated a little faster and a little bit more at a little bit more advanced level than I think people who have no gaming experience whatsoever. But Lords of Waterdeep is a very straightforward worker placement game in which you are placing people to take resources, and resources in this case are things like thieves and mages and paladins, right? So you're actually gaining those adventurers as resources, and then you're throwing them at quests. Quests cash in for points. It's fairly straightforward to explain. It can be a little jarring, I think, for people who are used to more the theater of the mind of tabletop RPGs to go, oh, suddenly your fighter is just an orange cube. Like, that may be a little bit too much abstraction for them to choke down at a point, and so maybe you might want to get the more advanced components. I don't have them, but ones that have, like, the fighters look like fighters. They're still orange, but you can see that, and the thieves look like little scampering thieves. You're building buildings, which are new worker placement spots. In the expansion, you get these super awesome resource spots that will also penalize you with skulls, but skulls are only as bad as how aggressively people have been taking them. If people haven't been taking them, they're not worth very many negative points. If people have been taking them a lot, they're worth a ton of negative points each. So it's just a fairly straightforward but interesting system, especially when you add in that expansion that adds those skulls that give you better spots, which means you can complete more quests, but you also are risking negative points, and then give you some ways to get rid of them, but they're not all necessarily going to come out in the same way, because certain buildings won't come out that will help you deal with them, and certain cards won't come out that will help you deal with them. So there's that push your luck aspect that just adds a bit more of the flavor to the game, which takes it up like a few gears from what it is to begin with. But if you just want to get people started, you probably just want to introduce them with the base game, unless you know for a fact they're not going to be intimidated by complexity. It's a very solid game. The theme is not completely tacked on, but it isn't like thickly laid on either. It's like, oh, this quest is about owl bears. Okay, great. Uh, I mean, that's it. It's just some text and a picture on a quest card. But it's still like 3 orange cubes, 5 black cubes, and 1 white cube. and $5. You pay that and you've got your quest and you get 25 points. That's all there is to it, right? But still, this is still a really good game to introduce people to, if they're willing to start, if they're willing to hit the ground running a little bit. And so that's the judgment you have to make. Anyways, that's a lot to say about it, but that is my number 41, Lords of Waterdeep. So that was my number 50 through 41 of my top 100 board games. I hope you enjoyed that. And yes, my theme was all along worker placement games. No, it was definitely not family weight games, just in case I want to use that category in a future set of 10. No, it was worker placement games all along. These are not the droids you're looking for. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you at the next one.